So I'm living in New York. At that point, I'm homeless. I'm poor. I have a shattered ankle. And I'm pretty much sponsorless, but I still have my ties with the New Deal. But I'm not sponsored by New Deal anymore. And I knew Andy Howell, who lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and he went to this art school called the Art Institute of Atlanta. And at the time, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was pretty much like, holy shit, I'm screwed. And it was sort of like didn't have a whole lot of options. It sounded pretty good. My friend was there. There was a good skate scene. I loved hip hop, and I knew the hip hop scene in Atlanta was blowing up. And so I said, screw it. I packed all my shit, and I moved to Atlanta.
So New Deal started in the pretty much June of 1990, and it was an instant hit.
So there was this kind of paradigm shift where, the Dogtown days were distant memory. Vert skating, which was a controlled suburban backyard activity, was kind of getting a little bit stale, and all of a sudden street skating became like this massive phenomenon. And I think the skateboard industry as a whole realized street skating is the thing that's going to grow the skateboard industry, because now you're not confined to a skate park or a ramp. You can do this anywhere. You can step out your door and it's like an open skate park. You can do anything you want. So I think that point changed skateboarding forever. And we were a part of that genesis.
On the cruise tip, a smooth trip, a stupid scratch with your mind flip. Easy to sample and a sample of the mystical melting pot of madness that took us to the pinnacle.
When that stuff hit, it was just like a completely new experience for skate kids. They were like, oh my God, this almost looks touchable. It's almost tangible. It's almost real enough that I could be involved in this, And I think that became something that just really helped inspire a whole new generation of creative people.
Street skating was this new phenomenon, and it was just being born. So every time you put your skateboard down, you were in some ways participating in that birth, because everyone was creating at the time.
So this new street skating thing came out. I was like, oh shit, some dude just grinded down a handrail. This guy just slid this ledge and came off in a grind and then shoved his board out of it at the end. And it's like, how did all that stuff happen right there on my street? Like, I can go right out of my door and it's going to happen right there. I mean, that was the empowering thing about this new street skating movement.
I think all of us guys that came from the East Coast, we have a certain, there's a certain sensitivity or sensibility that you have, that you're always kind of like looking back there, and that there's really special skaters that emerge from these areas, and they do things differently.
The East Coast was flat, So everybody that was street skating was learning how to street skate and creating these cool new tricks, but moving like at a really slow speed. And what was happening in California was the opposite. They were just flying all the time when they were skating. But all the East Coast guys that were coming up, they were skating, nobody had ever skated this way before. And it was just on flat ground type of thing, but I was just like, that's so sick,
I mean, it's really the city kids. They were all Andy's friends. They're the guys he brought to the team,
So I started to kind of pull these new skaters onto New Deal.
People got added to the team a year and a half later. The team was huge. It was so diverse. People didn't even know each other.
The team was so big that something needed to happen. I mean, it was just getting outrageous of how many guys rode for New Deal. And then there was just a little, crew of guys that didn't necessarily relate to the brand. You know, Chris Hall, and you know, Rick Abaceta. A lot of these guys just didn't fit that groove.
And at that time, Paul Schmidt told us that they were going to start another brand with Andy Howell.
And that was the start of Underworld Element.
I'm nigga that'll kill you up inside your crib. The nigga that'll shake your hand and bitch. Pull out my fofos, make the changes twist. Ice on your wrist, find you in the parking lot shop. Pat me real, think you walk, I'm removing your jaw. Eye contact, get your leg flat in your back. Max out, mask up, I'm dumping with the flamethrowers.
And people were just like, their jaws just dropped. They didn't even know what to do because hip hop wasn't even at that time connected with action sports whatsoever, you know?
And Underworld Element started with that mindset, you know, underground, big city, you know, type of thing.
AK auto with banana clip, filled in gangster rap, watch you walk with dogs. Busters can't help but hate me, I'm a ball in all. The picture of the life you wish. Wake up every morning, blonde hairs in my head, reach for my fist, slide it down into my hip. I got a bruise from the barrel, but that's gang apparel. Shut the f up, she dealing with the realest.
And then throughout this whole thing, Johnny was right by my side on all of it.
Johnny was working with Andy on New Deal stuff in the background. He was also working on Underworld Element.
And so I just kind of immediately, just organically became involved with Underworld right out the gate because I was already a big part of that family. And Andy and I had a ton in common. And you know, I was coming out of New York, obviously understood hip hop and that culture like the back of my hand. I mean, I lived the Underworld life.
Yeah, so Andy and Johnny were like two hip-hop peas in a pod. They both loved skateboarding, and they both were amazing artists. And in some ways, I think Andy kind of took Johnny under his wing.
Andy Howell was really a big inspiration of mine, and he was someone who I looked to for guidance.
I had this vision to start this big warehouse, basically, which would feel like Andy Warhol's factory, but would be our version of it, you know? The urban skate graffiti kid version of Andy Warhol's factory. And so I found this place in this area of town which was basically broken, burnt out crack houses.
And it was a warehouse in downtown Atlanta where we had a recording studio. We had all of our computers set up.
It was a crazy environment because you had all kind of different kids from different places.
And I built out all these walls inside it in these different rooms, and then I built 2 lofts in it that were live-in lofts.
And it was really exciting stuff. And in fact, at the time, I was so broke that I actually lived inside this loft.
And bought a whole bunch of screen print equipment, bought like 5 Mac computers, bought more music stuff, and just assembled all this stuff in there.
And it was like a real cool, fun time, like for us back then. We just was young kids, just skating and making T-shirts and rapping and just living life.
Jose Gomez is up there and he's working on stuff, and then Dave Kinsey's in there and he's working on stuff, Johnny's working on stuff, I'm working on stuff.
You've got Jefferson Pang, Little John, D-Money, X-Man, Scott Hershkovitz, and all these amazing artists, and we're all in the city doing all these crazy things, whether it be art, music, graffiti, skateboarding, graphics, you name it.
Skating is an art. It's an art to skating. It's an art to doing music. It's an art to graffiti. And definitely all of those things, when we were growing up and we were doing our thing together, we're totally tied together.
And what was really cool about it was all related to skateboarding, because all of us like had skateboarding in our DNA. And really it was just like a melting pot of creative individuals just sort of expressing themselves in all sorts of ways. And you know, at the time it was like the mecca of like hip hop was just growing. The Dirty South movement was like coming up. And then I don't really know how it all came together, but we decided we wanted to start a hip hop group.
Somebody was like, yo, let's do this rap group, and you know, you should be the DJ, and I think we would all like help out in doing the beats, and we're sitting in Andy's crib for hours going through old records trying to find little wax samples.
But we created this group, and it was called Mass Prophets. It's like we're prophets to the masses, but you can't deny the fact that the music industry was about making mass profits. You know what I mean?
Plugging all out, getting lit because I'm looping, catch a fire, this track, yo, the move is mad stupid. Look what you did, kid, went and bought my tape and tower, now you count, feeling style.
And Little John was our DJ, and Andy and I were the rappers. We had a few other guys in the group. There was a guy by the name of D Money, Jay Sun and Matt B were sort of like these flavor unit guys, and it was just incredible. We were actually at a point where we were potentially signing a record deal. We had a contract in front of us and everything, and we decided to go our separate ways so we could all pursue our dreams, which for Andy and I was mostly, you know, skateboarding and art, and for Little John, definitely making music.
We were having a good time with life, and it felt like nobody couldn't tell us we couldn't do anything. Like, I think all of us felt like we could do whatever we wanted to put our mind to, we could do it. We can do whatever we wanted to do, and we worked hard.
Johnny was kind of doing all of it then. He opened up a club there, and it was that totally fit his personality too. And it was called Graffiti.
So Johnny's in the rap group with me. We're working on different stuff together. He became the team manager for Underworld Element. So he's talking to all the team riders every day, making sure they got their packages and collecting stuff for their graphics and all that kind of stuff.
I would talk to Johnny every day. Like when I get home from school, I would call him and tell him, you know, what happened in school, what I'm about to go do at Love, what tricks I'm gonna try, when's the video coming out, when am I turning pro, like just everything.
This is a biography that's simply all about me. I'm sort of proud of suckers that could always down me. See, look, close to baby, maybe. I like the sort of time I've never speak the one baby. Flavors don't mind doing flavors for the flavor of a mingle. Here goes my back when my back began to tingle, daddy's hitting cherry. I know I'm not embarrassed.
I can really honestly say that Andy and Johnny was there for me. Like I was like the actual little kid on the team, you know, and it was dope to see how much patience they had for me, how much they cared about me, and that was probably the best feeling that I had in my whole life at that time.
Underworld was actually kind of ahead of its time. It really was. It was when skateboarding was something entirely different than it is today.
I think it was more like on some hip hop, underground, you know, definitely like some new flavor.
Underworld was one of the first companies, really second to shut probably, to come in and embrace that. You know, a lot of the riders were guys out in skateboarding that were misunderstood, coming from the cities, that got respect from like the core street skaters or the urban guys, but you know, the majority, the masses, had no idea who even half these guys were.
It was a total hit within all the cities, but it fell on deaf ears for the rest of, you know, America. And when our language was this zero sophisto, it was like this sophistication that you couldn't even understand if you lived outside of one of those cities.
And it had a lot of negative undertones that I think were really misunderstood.
And the underworld part of it was the idea that we were this unsophisticated, almost considered to be criminal, vandal underworld, the underbelly of contemporary modern culture. We were the scum. We were like the, you know, chewing gum that gets stuck on your foot of the businessman walking in his suit to work. It's like, oh, what's this? This is that skateboard thing, you know, let's get that out of there. And that became really the inspiration for creating Underworld Element.
Right when the company got started, I mean, it kind of had everything going against it, and in a lot of different ways. I mean, one, it was in the 90s, the early 90s, when skateboarding was going through all sorts of incredible changes, and skateboarding it wasn't necessarily in a dark place, it was just in a very big transitional place where things were kind of falling through the cracks inside the industry. And so it was a tough time to start a brand. And you know, most companies that did get started in the early 90s, most of them didn't survive.
It's kind of hard when you think about those things and think of, like, you know, that era in skateboarding where it's gone, you can never get that back. You know, like your childhood and your friends that's gone, you know what I mean? And you know, you still stuck with certain memories and good times. You know, it's kind of hard to swallow.
As Underworld was sort of coming to an end, we had toyed with the word Element, and it didn't have an identity yet. It was still actually very much associated to what Underworld was at the time. There was still some of the same team writers, and the brand was still kind of loose and trying to find direction.
At that point, we had dropped Underworld from the name, and we had done like 3 or 4 ads, and we just put out a video called Fine Artists.
And that was right around the same exact time that Andy was sort of trying to figure out what he was going to do with inside the company, and right around that time he left.
Basically that kind of became the point when I knew what was happening within skateboarding wasn't going to be enough to hold what I wanted to do. Wasn't going to be able to do my music stuff, wasn't going to be able to work on the fashion stuff that I wanted to do.
And then Andy was just sort of over it. You know, he had other things that were more interesting to him to express his creativity.
And at that point I was just like, peace, I'm just going in my own direction, you know. And that's where the break happened.
And it just didn't work. I mean, the company just did not work. And you know, everybody tried their hardest to make things happen, but at the end of the day, you know, when the consumer doesn't like the brand, or the consumer's not gravitating towards the brand, and it is misunderstood, I think to a certain degree, no matter how much you try, you know, at some point you've got to just move on. And that's what happened with Underworld. It just got to a point where it just wasn't going to work, and there was only so much you could do, and at the end of the day, the brand was misunderstood.